It could have been prevented. That's the worst part, is this didn't have to happen.
Beaches all along the Gulf Coast are clean, they are safe, and they are open for business.
I think BP realized it, and we realized it as well, that it was more cost effective for them to sink it and to hide it and disperse it than it was to just clean it up.
They just got us out there to get us in front of the cameras, so when they flew over with their helicopters, they could say that we was out there cleaning oil up when we wasn't doing nothing but sinking oil and just making a showing.
I don't want dispersants to be the Agent Orange of this oil spill.
Dispersed oil
if that disbursement is in that mud in any form, any shape, any manner, the shrimp is going to get it. It's going to be the first creature that gets it. I don't care what they say.
It appears the mixture is now breaking into small droplets.
I think this has got to be one of the most horrible things I've ever seen underwater.
Under the shroud of darkness, they would come in and do their thing. It was a huge cover-up.
On April 20th, 2010, a BP-leased drilling platform called the Deepwater Horizon exploded, killing 11 crewmates and injuring 16 others. The massive $560 million platform sank in 5,000 feet of water, where it had been drilling roughly 40 miles off the coast of Louisiana. Within days, rumors were circulating of a broken wellhead, spewing unknown amounts of raw crude every day into the Gulf, a sort of underwater volcano of oil.
It's the question nobody has an answer to. Just how much oil is gushing out at the spill site deep underwater in the Gulf of Mexico?
Frankly, whether it was 1, 5, or 10, or 15, our mobilization of resources have been for something far beyond that.
What really matters is this. There's oil leaking, and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it as soon as possible.
Here in Venice alone, we have over...
Despite what most engineers were saying, BP maintained that the broken wellhead flow rate was an estimated 1,000 barrels per day.
And that's the number BP is sticking with, too.
We're fighting it in the subsea, we're fighting it on the surface, and we are going to defend the shoreline.
There's been a cozy relationship between the oil companies and the federal agency that permits them to drill. But it is pretty clear that the system failed, and it failed badly.
The Deepwater Horizon was not equipped with a remote control, acoustically activated cutoff switch, which immediately shuts down wells during blowouts. These switches cost about $500,000, an amount BP earns about every 8 minutes. Acoustic switches are required in offshore drilling in other parts of the world. The United States, however, leaves the choice of installing them to the oil companies. 1 year prior to the blowout, BP submitted a 582-page regional spill plan for the Gulf that was approved by the federal government. However, the plan was flawed. For example, it lists sea lions, seals, sea otters, and walruses as sensitive biological resources in the Gulf. Yet none of these animals live there. It cites Peter Lutz as its national wildlife expert. Peter Lutz had died 5 years earlier. And nowhere in the 582-page government-approved plan does it mention how to stop a deepwater blowout.
It was frustrating to see the sort of primitive methods that were being used at first to try to stop this gusher. There was precedent not really a precedent, but close to it anyway, when the Ixtoc spill took place off the coast of Mexico years before.
And in the Gulf of Mexico, oil workers are trying to handle a much larger oil spill. A burning offshore oil well is dumping 30,000 barrels of crude each day into the Gulf.
The Coast Guard has already said it will be impossible to get it all.
In 1979, Mexico's government-owned oil company, Pemex, was drilling an oil well with the drilling rig Sedco when it experienced a blowout.
The worst spill in history. Workers are trying to put a giant cone over the well.
Airplanes are to be used to drop chemicals on the oil, but there is
At its peak, the well was spewing over 1 million gallons of oil per day. Officials were inventing methods to contain it.
Mexican officials are calling it Operation Sombrero. Workers have been trying since the weekend to put a 300-ton steel cone over the mouth of the runaway well. 2 relief wells are still being drilled to relieve pressure on the blown-out well, so it eventually can be capped.
The Ixtoc spill dealt a crippling blow to the Gulf's marine ecosystem and fishing industry, felt for decades.
Today, progress from 5,000 feet below the surface of the Gulf.
In 2010, BP attempts to stop the flow with similar tactics. At first, with a 4-story containment dome, Operation Top Hat.
One of which BP put on a barge today, with plans to lower it to the ocean floor, possibly by the weekend.
This containment system is a first of its kind.
As the dome was lowered, it became clogged by an icy mix of gas and water and failed. Then it was Operation Top Kill and Junk Shot.
Cement and mud are going to be shot into the well to plug it up. They're going to try that.
In shallow water, they'd be confident, but this water is so deep, they're hoping it works.
They tried the same techniques that were applied for the BP spill. But this is deep water. It's a mile underwater. The pressure is significantly greater. And hot oil coming out into a cold ocean filled with methane. There was no precedent for it.
We have been unable to overcome the flow from the well, so we now believe it's time to move on to the next of our options.
Very disappointed in today's announcement, and I know all of you are anxious to see this well secured.
Well, what we're trying to do is fight this thing offshore, and this is a war. It's an insidious war because it's attacking.
After weeks of conflicting reports of how much oil is escaping,
is it less than 50%?
I do not know, Senator.
And the futile efforts to stop it.
You don't know?
I don't think it's called a blowout prevention plan.
President Obama claims the federal response is the #1 priority.
And let me tell you, it is an anger and frustration that I share as president.
President Obama wasn't alone. Frustration was felt around the world, and people began questioning whether the oil giant BP really had a viable plan to stop it.
You know, our government needs to get somewhere in between drill baby drill and spill baby spill.
After weeks of failed attempts to plug the underwater gusher and conflicting media accounts,
this is at minimum catastrophic.
A small independent film crew decided to take action. They traveled to the Gulf Coast in an effort to find out what was really happening on the ground. What they found led them on a 3-year investigation.
How bad?
Why's this thing been open?
They move among locals from Louisiana to Florida, meet with fishermen, business owners, divers, fly with a marine biologist over ground zero, conduct independent oil and water tests to determine toxicity levels,
So I see press pass.
and are chased away from hotspots by BP security and local police.
Turn that off for me for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You turn it off for me, sir?
Yeah, I'll turn it off.
Their journey began in New Orleans on day 34 of the BP oil spill disaster.
1840, Antoine's is established. Classic French Creole cuisine.
Roaming the streets, you'd hardly know this region was facing the largest accidental man-made environmental disaster the world has ever seen, until you mentioned the spill.
It's really messing up our environment, our estuaries, our marshland, our seafood, Now there's a moratorium on the oil industry, people out of work. I mean, we're getting clobbered down here.
Not only are y'all killing animals, of course, killing the animals, of course, you're killing us.
We all know how to drill and we know how to pull the oil to make money, but we never came up with thoughts or a plan.
How do you feel about the handling of the spill right now?
I think it's the most unorganized mess that I've ever seen in my life. They're just throwing things out there, throwing money at it, and it's not accomplishing anything. We got people riding around in boats out there. It looks like a Chinese fire drill.
After a few days in New Orleans, the small crew connected with marine biologist and president of Blue Ocean Institute, Dr. Carl Safina. He needed a cameraman to document the spill by air. They volunteered.
You know, I think it's important to get a first-hand look at what's happening. I don't really like relying entirely on news reports, and I have a different kind of an eye for the wildlife and the marsh, so I think it's really important for me to get a first-hand look if I'm going to have anything much to say about it.
This is the west bank of the city of New Orleans. We're going to part out of here and go southeast, parallel the Mississippi River to the Bird's Foot or the head of the passes, and we're going to overfly the site right here.
That's ground zero.
Ground zero.
We flew out right over ground zero, right over the blowout, and right over these rigs that are trying to drill these relief wells. And it looks as though you took the ocean and you just emptied a giant pan of used motor oil on top of it. You could see by the streaks that it was an almost unbroken coating of oil. The oil is at different densities. There are some really thick blobs that are like the consistency of peanut butter, and or maybe axle grease is a better way of thinking of it. But then there are these thick anacondas of oil that are also snaking their way across the surface. It's really hard not to see that stuff and just say, holy shit. It is shocking. The scale of it is shocking. You see it in your camera and you get the camera's, the area that the camera can see. Then you move it and you take another little bit. But when you can sweep your eyes and realize that you don't see anything on the sea surface but oil. And then you come to this apocalyptic place over the blowout where these rigs are trying to drill these relief wells and they're flaring the gas and there are ships and helicopters and everything else. It's just mesmerizing. I think the strategy was hide the oil. Their liability is partly based on how much oil. They don't want us to know how much oil. They've been interfering with the public's ability to see and to know. They didn't want independent scientists to be taking independent estimates. They didn't want other cameras down there at the leak to try to estimate the flow. They've been dispersing it at the source. The source is really concentrated. You don't want to take a pollutant and disperse it when you have your hands around its neck right there.
What Dr. Safina is talking about is BP's decision to spray the chemical dispersant Corexit on the oil, the ingredients of which were proprietary and banned from use in BP's home country of England. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of chemicals, amounts never seen before, were sprayed by BP into the Gulf, with little to no environmental impact studies conducted.
What we thought was a good product.
There were some serious concerns raised by officials.
I don't want dispersants to be the Agent Orange of this oil spill.
In this case, you've got to follow the money. Who saves money by using these toxic dispersants? Well, it's BP.
We are still deeply concerned about the things we don't know. The long-term effects on aquatic life are still unknown, and we must make sure that the dispersants that are used are as non-toxic as possible.
It wasn't just spraying chemicals with planes on the surface, but also utilizing a technique called subsea injection, pumping chemical dispersants down a mile-long pipe into the oil and gas spewing at the broken wellhead.
I believe this is the first use at 5,000 feet and the first test at 5,000 feet.
It stuns me to think that we know that we need to utilize dispersants in the event of a spill, and yet we haven't put in place the testing necessary.
According to the EPA, the chemical dispersant Corexit that BP chose is far more toxic and much less effective on Louisiana crude than other dispersants. On May 19th, the EPA took action, giving BP this message.
We directed BP to look for more effective, less toxic alternative to their current dispersant.
The EPA was the only organization that knew the ingredients in Corexit 9527, as they were a trade secret. BP spokesperson Jack Pack assured us that Corexit was pretty effective. The 24 hours that BP was given by the EPA to find less toxic and more effective dispersants came and went. BP continued their use, citing safety and availability concerns with alternatives.
We have thousands of boats and almost 100 aircraft still working on this.
It came as no surprise. BP was on the board of Nalco, the manufacturer of Corexit. Again, the EPA strikes back, issuing this directive on May 26. BP shall eliminate the surface application of dispersants and seriously reduce subsurface application, going on to state that written permission must be requested in advance if exemptions are to be considered.
Bad enough you've got the oil, but then you magnify the impact of the oil by adding dispersants up here at the top and down here at the bottom, especially at the bottom. Bad move, really bad move.
It's like having a rotten egg in your hand. What you don't want to do is break the rotten egg and then bake a cake with it, because once that rotten egg is in the cake, you can't get it out. And that's what the dispersant does. It puts a rotten egg into the whole Gulf of Mexico.
Cut it off at the pass! Save our back bays! Cut it off at the pass! Save our back bays!
How does a place restore itself if even the smallest microbes can't survive, if there's no oxygen in the water and the booms don't work and it carries it in because it's sunken below the surface? How do we clean that up, BP? We don't. We can't. Stop the use of the dispersants. Quit hiding your mess and start cleaning it up.
In late May and early June, scientists began discovering massive underwater plumes of oil, one reportedly the size of Manhattan.
Testing has confirmed a large underwater plume of invisible oil in the Gulf, many miles from the Deepwater Horizon site.
Oceanographer Dr. Ian MacDonald was quoted as saying that there was now a tremendous amount of highly toxic material in the water column, both at the surface and below, moving around in one of the most productive ocean basins in the world.
Recently, the head of BP said that there was no evidence that oil plumes are floating below the surface.
Unlike what the CEO of BP said, they are not destined to reach the surface. Much of it is destined to float at some depth.
But BP, responsible for managing the fallout, appears to be in a perpetual state of denial. They insist all the oil is on top.
The oil is on the surface.
Do you not believe these plumes exist?
Harry, there are not, no one has found any large concentrations of oil beneath the surface.
So these scientists are making it up. So scientists are making it up.
This, critics say, is what BP does not want you to see. Oil and chemical dispersants swirling together into a toxic soup.
Oh my God.
Forming large plumes under the surface of the water as deep as 25 feet, perhaps deeper.
The entire water column is thick with this oil and chemical dispersant mix, and it's absolutely disgusting. I think this has got to be one of the most horrible things I've ever seen underwater.
Scientists were deeply concerned with everything from plankton, minute plants and animals that are the foundation of the ocean's food chain, to sperm whales.
BP has pumped about 1 million gallons of dispersants into the Gulf.
The film crew traveled all along the Gulf states, from Louisiana to Florida during June, July, and August 2010.
A captain came in and talked to us about the oil spill. He just said that BP is spraying a chemical on top of the oil and it's making it sink, so they can't tell where it's going.
Everything that can and would be is being poisoned. All the fish, all the crabs, all the oysters, our life, our sand, everything we live for is slowly being destroyed. And it seems like everything's very slow to fix it, if it ever can be fixed. It's very sad.
I'd say the oil is getting into the inland waters and it's getting worse and worse every day. And it's not being cleaned up quick enough. But I mean, what else can I say?
Well, they don't know how to clean it up. They don't know where to clean it up. They don't know when it's going to stop. They don't know how to put out buoys. The buoys are not working. Nothing's working. They need to get some people that's educated together and find out they can figure out which way they need to go before they go too far going the wrong way.
It's early July. The well is spewing something like the Exxon Valdez oil spill every few days, with no end in sight. The U.S. Appeals Court overrules President Obama's ban on new drilling in the Gulf, and the crew is having trouble getting answers on the ground.
How many pounds of sand is in one of those bags?
Is anybody allowed to talk to the press, or you guys know? Hey guys, where do these plastic containers go? Is there anybody here who can tell me where those go?
All the workers there, whether they work for the government or for BP or for private contractors who work for BP, they've all been told not to talk to the press, not to talk to the public about their work. Shouldn't they be allowed to share with the public the work they're doing?
I have put out a written directive, and I can provide it for the record, that says the media will have uninhibited access anywhere we're doing operations, except for two things: if it's a security or a safety problem. That is my policy. I'm the National Incident Commander.
Can I ask a quick question?
I can't answer anything. Have you guys actually asked BP to stop using dispersants?
Can't comment on anything like that. You got to go to the JIC.
I think they can't wait to talk. Oh, fantastic.
You don't know who you work for?
No. Would you swim in the water right now?
I can't comment on that.
You got an opinion, don't you?
Hey man, we're doing a documentary. You mind answering a few questions for us? I'm not allowed to. You're not allowed to? Why not?
Let me jump out.
But nobody seems to know where all the stuff's going.
Okay, is that car with you, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, one is blocking the road. You turn that off for me for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You turn it off for me, sir?
Yeah, I'll turn it off.
Are you recording?
Well, yeah.
If you'll turn your camera off, I'll tell you what I see.
Every one of us who has been down here for even a few days has been turned away from places, has had hassles with the cops and the sheriff departments, has been told that BP doesn't want cameras around. Well, BP had a permit to drill a hole in the seafloor. They did not have a permit to pollute the Gulf of Mexico. So we have microbes here that can deal with some oil. Right now we're overwhelming that system, and nobody really knows how fast it will bounce back. In other places where these blowouts have happened, it has taken decades.
The spill may prove to be one of the most devastating environmental disasters this nation has ever faced.
A former BP worker agrees to meet with the film crew, provided they don't reveal his identity.
These are a list of the special task force boats?
Correct.
That were spraying correction?
Yes.
He was in charge of nearly 80 VU boats, vessels of opportunity, a program BP put together to employ local fishermen put out of work by the spill.
I think BP realized it, and we realized it as well, that it was more cost effective for them to sink it and to hide it and disperse it than it was to just clean it up. BP was dumping a bunch of money in the pockets of these boaters to keep them happy, to keep them quiet. I don't think it ever was the intent to actually find and recover this oil. They were getting paid to ride around on the boats, pick up a little bit, call the rest of it in. That way, the command center and BP would have the latitude and longitude of where it was being found, so they would know exactly where to spray their dispersants.
He tells the crew that before sundown, BP collected all of his team's data and then took over.
Under the shroud of darkness, they would come in and do their thing. It was a huge cover-up. Now, what was a thick peanut butter brown oil on the surface the day before is now a bubbly mess.
But someone is going to have to explain to me why BP would not want to clean up this oil. This
well,
was not.
Because it's more cost effective for y'all to come at night and sink the son of a bitch. When the oil's coming around, they call y'all, they tell y'all where the oil's at, and the first thing y'all do is tell them to go the other way. Y'all send the plane and y'all fucking sink it. That's what y'all doing. Come on, man. Let's quit playing over here and tell the truth. Y'all sinking the oil, Jason. You know y'all sinking it. You know what y'all doing. Y'all send all the boats, y'all put them in a group at night. We all hear the planes, and the next morning there's nothing but white bubbles. What you think? We stupid? We're not stupid. Y'all putting the oil on the bottom of our fishing ground. Y'all not only messing me up now, y'all messing me up for the rest of my life.
And the fish are.
I ain't gonna live long enough to buy any more shrimp.
The crew traveled to Grand Isle, Louisiana to meet the man who publicly stood up to BP.
You know, all our seafood is a bottom feeder. And the plankton and the nutrients that feed our seafood, the small fish and the shrimp and the crabs, is on the bottom. If they go to eat and there's a big clumps of oil on top of the food, we don't know what the effect's gonna be. And it looks like the Coast Guard helping them, you know, by trying to cover it up too.
It smells a whole lot like lighter fluid or thin lighter fluid or something. I live here. I've never smelled that before in all the time that I've lived here. By the way, there's children swimming in this water right now. Right now.
It smells like a refinery. That's benzene.
Does that gross you out?
Yeah.
You see all that brown stuff?
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
It's oil.
Look at that.
Gross. Yeah, gross.
But you guys were swimming in it just a little while ago.
Yeah, that's because we had no clue that oil was that bad in it. Yeah.
Heck, I didn't know what it was. You know?
Where was this?
Last weekend, we went to Gulf Shores. Saturday afternoon, we all, both her and I, broke out in hives all over us.
How did that water make you feel?
It made me itchy.
It did make you itchy?
Governor, should people be concerned about toxicity? Should they be concerned about what's in that water that might be harmful to them?
Well, we're always concerned, and Harry, that's why we continuously test, is just to make sure that it is safe for the people to go in there. Our first obligation is the health, safety, and welfare of our people. It is safe. There isn't a toxic nature to it that is detrimental to anybody. It's much more of a nuisance than it is anything else at this point, but it is safe.
I think the fish are pretty hardy. If I was a fish, I'd be a lot more worried about sharks and porpoises than I would be about the dispersants personally, okay? But that's now that being said, I'm not a scientist. The beaches are safe, the water's safe, the seafood is safe.
Based on the data at hand, we see nothing to indicate that there's a toxicity problem anywhere in the sand or in the water.
It was early August 2010. A group of scientists report that the wells spewed 4.9 million barrels of raw Louisiana crude into the Gulf. And the EPA released a study that dispersant oil mixtures are generally no more toxic to the aquatic test species than oil alone.
Small droplets capable of passing right into the flesh of fish.
And the government releases some good news.
The White House now says most of the oil that leaked out from the Macondo well is actually gone.
The oil is gone. It was captured, it was skimmed, it was burned, it was contained. Mother Nature did her part.
And then there's natural bacteria in the ocean that's eating it up further, Margaret. So it seems that the oil is, believe it or not, disappearing.
A recent report by our top scientists found that the majority of oil has now evaporated or dispersed, or it's been burned, skimmed, or recovered from the wellhead. And the dispersed oil is in the process of degrading.
You get fined based on the amount of oil that you can see and measure. And if it disappears, poof, it's gone, evaporated into the sky, or dispersed into the ocean, you have less to pay.
Massachusetts Representative Ed Markey, the man who forced BP to release the high-resolution footage of the broken wellhead, was now publicly alleging that BP carpet-bombed the Gulf with dispersants, essentially sweeping it under the rug.
They were used on an almost daily basis. They were used even though the EPA said that they should be used rarely. And my concern is that they were used in greater quantities than even the government indicated that BP should be permitted to use them.
BP's Chief Operating Officer, Doug Suttles, responds to Representative Markey's allegations.
Well, you know, we worked very, very closely in Unified Command, and that includes the Coast Guard, BP, people like the EPA, NOAA, other agencies, on what the right response was. And dispersants were only one tool. There were very, very rigorous protocols we had to follow. We had to apply for permission to apply them. It was based on surveillance data. The Federal On-Scene Coordinator, the Coast Guard, has to formally approve those. Some days they approved our request, other days they didn't.
Representative Markey and others from the Committee on Energy and Commerce decided to look into the relationship between BP and the United States Coast Guard. They sent this letter to Incident Commander Thad Allen, demanding the U.S. Coast Guard explain why they allowed BP to continue spraying Corexit after the EPA's May 26th directive to stop or seriously cut back, except in rare cases. Admiral Thad Allen replied with nearly 250 pages of documents, correspondence between BP and the Coast Guard. These show that on May 28th, 2 days after the directive was issued, BP began requesting exemptions. Each and every request for the following 2 months was granted. BP even respectfully requested retroactive authorization, which Rear Admiral James A. Watson of the U.S. Coast Guard approved. BP came up with a number of reasons for exemptions. The inability to skim or burn, bad weather, high levels of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, or volumes of oil. The amounts of Corexit requested was in gallons and varied from day to day. 7,000, 14,400, 19,200, 21,000, 36,000. And there were handwritten corrections of amounts. Among the roughly 250 pages, the film's producers did not find a single day's request denied. All of BP's requests were approved, either by the United States Coast Guard or occasionally NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. All in all, BP admitted dumping 1.84 million gallons of the chemical dispersant Corexit into the Gulf. This is an old United States Coast Guard sign posted to warn fishermen that they would be fined $32,500 every time they used soaps or other dispersing agents to dissipate oil, pointing out that it's more harmful to the marine environment than if the oil had been left alone.
To just put massive amounts of dispersant over the Gulf harming the plankton, harming the turtles, harming everything living in the system, changing the chemistry of the water itself, magnifying the toxicity of the oil while you're adding a toxin in its own right.
Oceanographer, aquanaut, and author Dr. Sylvia Earle was named by Time magazine first hero of the planet. After her experience with the Exxon Valdez and the Persian Gulf oil spills, she was called to consult on the Deepwater Horizon disaster. She discussed some of the biggest problems with using dispersants.
It becomes a part of the ocean then. It becomes a part of the plankton. It gets taken up as a part of the chemistry of the Gulf of Mexico. Then the fish have to swim in it. It comes through their skin, comes little filter feeders take it in. Crabs take it in, shrimp take it in, fish take it in, and they're bathed in it. It's just not a smart decision.
Is there any concern that the dispersed oil is actually so small that it has a greater chance of entering the food chain?
Oil that is dispersed is in smaller droplets, and it would be smaller droplets affect smaller creatures, bigger chunks affect bigger creatures. So I think the dispersed oil
the seafood from the Gulf is the most highly tested seafood in the world. There is no seafood tested nearly as much, not even a fraction as much, as the seafood that's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. And the seafood is wholesome.
We are helping train state and local regulators from the 5 Gulf states in sensory perception in order to be able to detect contamination in seafood coming out of the Gulf.
Some are easier than others. You know, everybody's nose works a little differently. For me, the oysters are a little more challenging to pick up the taint in.
I love that shirt, Shut Up and Fish.
Oh, yeah. I didn't understand that when they shut the place down. You could fish on the left side, but you couldn't fish off on the right side over here. With a bridge. I didn't understand that either.
This is Frank, son of Joe Patty. Since 1935, the dawn of seafood in the Gulf.
I've got shrimp that was frozen pre-BP disaster. That shrimp is a different shrimp than the one that I see in the water catching now. It's different. They say, what's different about it? I said, the head. The head of the shrimp is everything to do with the shrimp. The body is nothing but flesh, meat. The head contains everything in that shrimp like a human body. Our head and our stomach, that's all in the head of a shrimp. And a shrimp, a white shrimp, lives in the mud at nighttime. He comes out in daytime, he, she, it, whatever. A brown shrimp comes out at nighttime and goes in the mud in the daytime. So they all live in the mud, shrimp. All the shrimp lives in the mud. If that disbursement is in that mud, in any form, any shape, any manner, the shrimp is going to get it. It's going to be the first creature that gets it. I don't care what they say. It's going to be a creature that gets it. Well, tell where all the seafood come from. Somebody told me the other day that the micronism, little creatures that you can't see, is eating up that oil in the disbursement so fast that we won't even know it's been there. Can you believe that?
According to chemical oceanographer David Hollander, 25% of the oil can be accounted for by burning, skimming, etc. But 75% is still unaccounted for, meaning about 150 million gallons has vanished.
To the best of our knowledge, there is no oil that is accumulating on the seafloor. We have no evidence that there is any oil that is sitting on the bottom or sinking down to the bottom.
The water laps over the hull as we rocket downwards 5,000 feet.
We should be seeing a cacophony of life here, with creatures dreamed up for a sci-fi movie. But on this moonscape,
there's nothing crawling around on the surface of the bottom. It's just worm tubes that are collapsed over.
It's called oily fluff, and it's thick. We turned on the ultraviolet light, and look at this. Those phosphorescent ink blots, all oil. Joy and the other scientists dispute a government report that the vast majority of the oil has dissipated.
It sank, and it's still there, and it's going to degrade very slowly.
How slowly?
Years to decades. The smell of being out there, I wake up at night sometimes, and it's like I'm suffocating, and that's
Professor of Marine Sciences at the University of Georgia, Dr. Samantha Joy, was the first scientist to discover plumes of oil in the Gulf in the summer of 2010.
Land right now.
The team caught up with her in June of 2011 to discuss her multiple trips to the seabed floor in submarine Alvin.
I mean, the surface was a nightmare, but you look under the surface and it didn't stop. The nightmare continued almost all the way to the bottom. And that's what people don't understand. You know, it wasn't just oil on the surface. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. See how it's spattered with, these are dead worms. And it's just like somebody took a paint gun and splattered oil all over the bottom. When you have crude oil components like benzene or xylene or polyaromatic hydrocarbons, those compounds can be measured with specific analytical techniques. When you start dispersing oil and breaking those compounds up, all the dispersants do is it breaks those compounds up.
Disappears. The oil goes away.
Doesn't take it out of the solution. I mean, if you put 4 sugar cubes in your coffee and you tasted it, your lips would pucker because it would be really sweet. The sugar's in there, it's just not in a solid form. The oil's in there, it's just not as easy to track.
Dr. Joy shared some footage of how the seabed floor should look.
It's a gelatinous zooplankton. The ecology of the system has been altered. You know, and people can deny that all they want, but I'm not the only one who's seen it. You know, people who've been out there and looked on the seafloor, they've seen oiled corals, they've seen oiled crabs, they've seen oiled animals, they've seen, you know, seafloors that's just void of life in terms of megafauna and macrofauna. Those sorts of things are going to take years to recover from, if not decades.
A number of fishermen agreed to meet with our team, provided they could remain anonymous.
Do you work for BP?
Hell no.
Okay.
No.
I just got to ask you.
No.
Got to ask you anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd say nobody has a clue. Honestly, we don't have a clue. Some species are showing up great. Other species aren't showing up at all. The mammals, porpoises, dolphins, dying like crazy. Everybody's keeping the stuff quiet.
I've been on the water all my life. I know things, you know. All that dispersant and everything else they sprayed out there. All them fish have a certain slime on them to keep organisms out of there. Well, it's broke that down. It lets them parasites get in there in that new blood. Well, it makes them sores and lesions on them. And that's exactly what's happening. And I ain't no rocket scientist, but I know that's what's happening.
I mean, well, y'all wanted me to tell you that it's all good, because it ain't all good. All these commercials running around about all the Alabama commercial fishermen saying it's all good, it's all good. Who are these guys? We don't know them, and I thought we knew everybody.
You're lucky if you get 200 pounds.
I've been crabbing all my life. I ain't never seen it this bad.
But I know things aren't right. They got butterfish that's spitting up purple stuff, and their bellies are rotting out of them before they can get them back to market.
There's 3 in there.
I know the crabs are dying. There's just so many things that's out of place. That's your biggest baseline. Never before. You know, they said, well, we need a baseline. Never before is a hell of a baseline.
And we're making sure people know that the Gulf is open for business. The beaches are beautiful, the seafood is delicious. Last year, many areas even reported record tourism seasons. The progress continues, but that doesn't mean our job is done. BP's still here, and we're still committed to seeing this through.
I'm surprised how little oil was collected. I'm surprised how completely unprepared they were for collecting any oil. And I was, kind of shocked at how the entire game plan was to dissolve it with dispersants so that we could never get our hands on it.
I've heard it from NOAA and the Coast Guard that primarily that dispersants are no more toxic than your average everyday detergents.
Well, then take a bath in them. Who wants to take a bath in Corexit? I don't. And I bet you that you could not get anybody that works for NOAA, the EPA, to take a bath in Corexit.
In late December 2012, the film crew once again drove down to Grand Isle, Louisiana, to meet with Dean Blanchard, president of Dean Blanchard Seafood. A month earlier, Mr. Blanchard caught some shrimp that appeared to have been excluded from BP's ubiquitous ads.
It looked like some kind of tumor coming out the side. Like I said, I'm not a scientist, but I mean, I've been looking at shrimp since I was born. I was born in a shrimp house. I ain't never seen nothing like this. Basically, the head's twice the size of what it should be. You got a growth coming out the side. They ain't got no eyes. I mean, there's something wrong. I mean, where the oil came and where the disbursements were sprayed, this is what you have. But if you go 100 miles to the west or 100 miles to the east, you don't see as many as these. There's just one every once in a while. Basically, it's actually worse than it was in 2011. In 2011, we had some leftovers from 2010 when we weren't able to fish. And so 2011 showed a great year for the Gulf of Mexico. And if you look back at what happened in Alaska the following year after the spill was the same thing. It was a record-breaking year the following year. The same thing happened over here. Now going into 2012, we've dropped down to about 30% of what we used to do on a Gulf-wide production. Now for local production, we ain't even at 5% of what we used to do. They used to be able to see about 100, you should have 100 boats shrimping back here today and you have 0.
Mr. Donald Waters has been fishing the Gulf for 4 decades and active in the fisheries management since 1986, with expertise in stock assessments in red snapper and king mackerel for the Gulf of Mexico.
We're going through a red snapper stock assessment now, which may or may not include any post-oil data. They haven't made a decision on it. In 2013 is when they're going to do the assessment, and if it does include any post-oil data, it would only be 1 out of 5 years, so it would be watered down to 8 or 10% of the assessment. So it would be the next assessment 5 years from now that would include a lot of post-oil data, and then the story would really hit the table, but BP would be well gone by then.
So here we are in 2015, almost to the 5th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon blowout. And what we've learned is that the impacts on the ecosystem were much broader than we initially anticipated and realized. I think that a lot of people were very much acutely aware of the coastal and nearshore impacts of the oil spill, but not many people realized that there was 10 to 15% of the oil lying on the seabed having impacts to the organisms that live on the bottom of the ocean, with implications for food webs that we really don't understand yet.
If I were the big boss of the world, if I had the say about using dispersants versus not using the dispersants, I would say no. In fact, I would say hell no.
I think it's really important to think about what it means in the big picture. We've had for 30 years a culture of deregulation, a culture that seems to devalue the idea that government is here to protect the interests of most of us from the narrower, more immediate interests of just a few people, like the big oil companies that are mostly concerned with their profit. And we've had very lax oversight. There was obviously no plan, no preparedness.
We filed.
In case of a disaster is something.
They don't even have the equipment to deal at this scale, but that is not just their fault, although I fault them for all of that, but it's also our fault for allowing a culture of deregulation and also for allowing for 30 years the government to not create for us, because we haven't demanded that the government create for us alternative sources of energy that we can use. So while I do blame them and I do fault them for their lack of preparedness and for trying to hurry it up and for being concerned only about their profits, in a sense, in a very real sense, we've really allowed this to happen.
What people got to realize is, even though they don't care about us down here and don't care, you know, what's happening to the Gulf, but just think in your mind, if they're capable of doing that to us, who's going to be next?
If I had a chance to talk to President Obama about the Gulf of Mexico, I would plead for the establishment of marine sanctuaries. The mesophotic reefs and the Deepwater coral reefs in the northeastern Gulf in particular, those are just incredible ecosystems with phenomenal biological diversity, and they deserve protection.
Under the Antiquities Act, the President can designate areas for protection as monuments. President Bush, in 2006, with a stroke of his pen, designated the area around the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and later did it again in the Western Pacific, around Rose Atoll and the Mariana Trench and a few other areas.
The monuments will prohibit resource destruction or extraction, waste dumping, and commercial fishing.
In 2 pen strokes, established areas in the ocean that are greater than all of the national parks put together.
President Obama has signed a memorandum to expand a vast marine reserve in the Pacific Ocean. It means commercial fishing and deep-sea mining will be banned in the conservation area. This is a massive zone. It consists of 7 scattered islands, atolls and reefs that lie between Hawaii and American Samoa. The waters that surround these islands are home to corals, seabirds, sharks and vegetation not found anywhere else in the world.
It has increased the area of protection by around 1 million square kilometres in this area alone. So that equates to approximately 4 times the size of the surface of the UK. And that will add a significant proportion to the global area of marine conservation zones currently under management.
It's only now that we're beginning to fully understand that the ocean matters. You might not care, even if you know. But you can't care if you don't know.